Good evening, everyone. I can see people jumping on right now. We're just going to give it a couple more seconds just to let everyone log on and settle in. Welcome, welcome.
Nice to see some familiar names on the call tonight. I think Felicia's on there. How wonderful. How wonderful.
We get everyone to please type in the chat box if you can hear and see us, please. Say hello. Thanks, Eileen. Great, excellent. Just a reminder that there's two options in the chat box. You can either send the message to all panelists or all panelists and attendees. If you'd like your message to be seen by everyone, we recommend doing all panelists and attendees. Thank you. So welcome to the Positivity Prescription virtual book launch. Very exciting. It's Dr. Suzy Green's first book to the public. We've also got Professor Lindsay Odes here as well. He'll be hosting the evening and Suzy will be introducing him. Thanks, Suzy. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Claudia. I just want to thank Claudia because she's been instrumental in launching the book. And we were very, very lucky. We did have an opportunity to do a small, in real time launch about the week before COVID actually hit. So then we decided it might be a good idea to do a virtual launch too, so we can talk a little bit more about the book. So thank you so much for everyone that's come on. I can see Wendy's there from France and Pep's there from the UK. A whole lot of familiar names, some new names. So welcome to people that I haven't met before. Thank you so much for taking time to come on to the call tonight. And it is a great pleasure to have Lindsay hosting this evening's event. I've known Lindsay for, wow, Lindsay, I'm not sure how many years now, 20 years, I think.
Just a few.
just a few years. And some of you may know, Lindsay is the director for the Positive Psychology Centre at the University of Melbourne. He also holds a PhD in clinical psychology and an MBA. And he's working on a really interesting project, he was telling me just before we came on the call, with UNESCO, which he might tell us a little bit about before we actually get into the Q&A for tonight. But I did want to do a little bit of positive reminiscing before we started. Some of you may know that Lindsay was my doctoral supervisor, and I started the doctorate in clinical psychology in 2001, completed it at the end of 2003. And the study that I conducted was a world first. And I have to say, absolutely, completely thanks to Lindsay, because the original research, I think, Lindsay, I was looking at schizophrenia. I was working in a psychiatric clinic, and there was a talk on at our local Australian Psychological Society by our Australian Psych Society, and it was on life coaching. And so I went along because I'd actually been keeping a folder of newspaper cuttings on this emerging field of life coaching. And I thought I'll just go along. This will be interesting to see what a couple of psychologists have got to say about this coaching stuff. And Lindsay was there. Now, I'd already, I guess, formalised the relationship with Lindsay in terms of Lindsay being my supervisor. And we had started to look at research on schizophrenia. But I sort of said to Lindsay, what are you doing here? And he said to me, we've always done this. We've been using these same approaches, but from a clinical perspective to help people with mental illness, in fact. And so to cut a very long story short, I ended up doing a world first study with Lindsay, and we did have our hands, we really had a bit of a fight on our hands, Lindsay, initially, because if you recall, there wasn't a lot of support for doing this type of intervention, and all of my student colleagues were studying depression and anxiety, and I was doing a life coaching study. And in fact, in a little bit of positive reminiscing, I found an old newspaper clipping from the Illawarra Mercury. So I did my doctorate at the University of Wollongong. And I'm not sure, Lindsay, if you agree whether the coaching program actually helped us and others find the meaning of life. But
I really like that title. It sort of overpromised a little bit, but I do remember that yellow, that head there was a yellow head, which I actually bought from Golo for $5, and I still have it.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you for the reminiscence.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. So thanks again for offering to host this evening, but I'll hand over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Suzy, and thank you also, Claudia, for making this come together so smoothly. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the virtual book launch for the Positivity Prescription. As you've just heard from the reminiscence, this is very meaningful to me to see this book come out and see Suzy to continue to succeed and spread these important messages. I want to just highlight that I understand that this is Suzy's first book, and I do recall the time when Suzy told me that she didn't like research and she didn't like writing, but she does have 20 other publications as well in addition to this book. So it's really nice to be here to celebrate and help launch this book. And hopefully tonight's rejuvenating for you all. Obviously, with the coronavirus pandemic, this is a challenging time for all of us in many different ways. And that's where I wanted to start off with you, Suzy, and actually think about the book, its content. Firstly, why did you write it? And why now? It's coming out at a very interesting time. What really led up to writing it for you, and how do you think it relates to the current challenges we face?
Yeah, well, it's been a long time coming. I guess I had been considering writing a book for a very long time, and if I went back through my folders, I'd had a number of attempts with different titles for the book over the years. But as my professional practice grew, and particularly the business started to grow, I guess I didn't have the bandwidth, in a sense, to write the book. And I was always curious when people did write books for the public. I'd always ask them, how did you manage to write that book? And I think, as you said, I wrote I have over 20 peer-reviewed published articles and chapters in academic texts. And funnily enough, because I've never really considered myself an academic, like you said, I sort of swore I'd never do any more research, but I don't know whether, Lindsay, it's my top strengths of curiosity, creativity and zest and hope, the whole kit and caboodle of my strengths. But I did write all those papers, and I do love the science. But I think what I really wanted to do was to sort of bring the best of what I'd learned and practiced with clients over many, many years and in workshops, and try and put it together in a user-friendly format for as many people as possible to access.
And how do you think it relates to the challenges at the moment? Obviously, you were kind of writing it anyway, and no doubt as it was coming out, this new challenge came to the world. And I don't want to make tonight all about the pandemic, because we're probably all getting sick of hearing about it, but not so much the pandemic, but the psychological issues that are already unfolding during the uncertainty and the fear and the challenges it has brought and will continue to bring. Where does positivity and positivity prescriptions fit into those challenges?
Well, I find it really interesting timing, really, and I guess I've also believed a lot in, the Jungian concept of synchronicity, and I have found in my life many times, Lindsay, I guess including the little story I gave at the beginning, in being what I considered to be in the right place at the right time. And I feel very privileged and fortunate. And I have, over the last so many years, really do feel like this is my calling, that I am absolutely meant to be doing the work that I'm doing. So as much as, I've had all these frustrations about, I've written all these scientific papers, I've never published a book for the public, I think it's been the perfect timing for it to come out. And in fact, when it first came out, we had a PR company working with us, and after the first week of COVID, they had Claudia and I on the phone, and they said, "We're really sorry, we're just not getting any uptake with COVID." And I said, "What?" I said, "You're joking." I said, "We need positivity more than ever." And they said, "Tell us about it." So as I started to explain that, I guess on the flip side, when people go into fear and fight or flight, and then it can actually, the stress can cause affect our immune functioning, which can then actually lead to us getting sick. So I sort of explained that and then explained the power of positivity and the science behind that. They then rewrote the media release, and all of a sudden we got all this interest in the power of positivity in in the COVID situation, or in a VUCA, the volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world that we're in. So in many ways, COVID has actually been, it's actually made people more aware of the psychological skills that I talk about in the book more than ever. And I think too, because Lindsay, people are at home. So I've been running a lot of webinars myself, actually, the last month or so. And so the content seems to be even more relevant because people are in the thick of it, professionally and personally. So it's becoming more meaningful, the learning to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think exactly that. People's relationship to the pandemic is more often psychological than it is direct exposure. So I agree totally. And we're seeing exactly the same thing in the school system. Yeah. I want to ask you a question. I did find it marvellous how the 6 psychological constructs or concepts that are in the 6M model, which make up a large part of the book and the structure of the book and based on the model, they all start with M. It's an incredible coincidence that all these psychological things start with M.
It's a miracle.
A marvellous miracle, yes. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the 6M model, what it is, yeah, and why did you choose those 6 and not, say, 7 or not 3 others that could have been in there? What is it and why did you choose those 6?
Well, I've been asked that question a few times, and it really came about when a school principal in Adelaide, actually, Lindsay, asked me one day, she said, Suzy, she said, if you had a wish for a senior high school student walking out our gates for the very last time, in terms of the key psychological skills that you wish they had, leaving our school, going out into the world, what would they be? And that question stuck with me, and I went away and I thought about it, I guess from a science perspective, but more so as a practitioner that's worked with over 500 individuals, clinically counselling, coaching, and I started to map out the key skills that I knew worked for the majority of people. And so I created, mood, I think mood is the first one. And for me, that was really important because for those of you on the call, and I know there are a lot of people on here that know about positive psychology, and what positive psychology has really done has really highlighted the importance of positive emotions. Now, in saying that, I still struggle with the labels of positive, negative, so I'm using them, I guess, lightly at the moment. But as a clinical psych, which is, same as Lindsay, I knew from the very beginning that the so-called negative emotions were equally as important, that we weren't trying to get rid of them. And but really with positive psychology, we were starting to learn a lot more about positive emotions than I'd ever learned at university. And I say in the book, I never had a lecture on love or joy or kindness, particularly through my master's. But so mood for me is a broader concept of the full range of human emotions. Although in the book, I do focus in on the positive emotions, but I do talk about the full range of human emotions. And then it sort of, I guess, developed and elaborated from that. And I moved into motivation. And for me, because I thought about somebody that was starting the program, and it is a 6-week, you can do it longer if you want. But so first of all, I wanted people to think about, their mood and to have, I guess, some psychoeducation around what we do know around mood. But the next thing was I wanted them to start to think about their motivation for actually doing the program. And I actually drew very heavily on coaching psychology in that module. And, the 40 years of research on goals and wellbeing and intrinsic motivation. And then I moved into might, and this is where I really did take a bit of creative license. So that's the strengths component, and I had to do a bit of brainstorming, and then I thought might, that will work. And I focus more on the character strengths, although there are other types of strengths, as we know. And then I moved into meaning, and there's some great research on meaning that also combines looking at character strengths as well, and also values, which I'd spoken a lot about in motivation. Then I moved into mindfulness. and then which is, as most people know, it's very hot topic right now, and then into mindset. So there is sort of a sequential order, because for me, having the mindfulness too, prior to learning the mindset skills, you're able to be more mindful of your mindset as well. And so it ends on week 6 with mindset, and then the conclusion actually, I guess, encourages people to think about taking some form of coaching approach to keep going after the book is finished.
So in terms of your experience in working as a coach, working as a psychologist, how has that impacted on how you've written it and how you've approached those 6 M's, or any of the particular 6 M's? How's your experience impacted on how you constructed or thought about putting the material together? Because as you said, a lot of the listeners will be familiar with the material, but how did you come to approach it in the way you have?
Yeah, well, I actually I did ask a lot of people about writing books, and a few people had said to me, you've got to have your ideal audience, or, you've got to think about someone who this book would really benefit. And so I did have a friend, unnamed, who I thought was an amazing person, but she was doing amazingly well without ever learning any of these skills. And so I sort of kept her in mind, and then thought how I would work with her as a coach. And I guess then I also thought about all of the people that I had worked with over the years, particularly from a coaching perspective as well. So that's how I sort of brought it together, so that it really would be how I would approach, I guess, a coaching session with someone, a series of coaching sessions.
So let's talk about the possible readers. Who do you think would most benefit? Like what sort of people, if you had to sort of profile the market, so to speak, if you want to put it in business language, but who do you think will benefit from, or mostly from this book?
I did have a few audiences in mind. The first one is people that perhaps have a family history of depression, clinical depression, or have suffered with depression. And again, they may have learnt some of these skills if they had been to see a psych. But I think what I've done is brought some of the key ones together, because there are, and actually that's another question I've been asked in some of the interviews, is how is this different from other psych books on the market? And I guess what I see is that there are books that are on CBT or ACT or on motivation or on mindfulness. But what I've done is try to bring them all together and look at how they're integrated and how they work together. So, so there's people that might have had a family history or are concerned about their mood, maybe languishing, even subclinical depression.
Which, as we know, there is a lot of people like that. Yes,
and we do have an assessment in the book, and referral to Black Dog Institute to do further assessment, and encouragement to talk to your GP if you are concerned. But also I find in the workbooks and people that approach us for personal coaching through the business are people that have got an intrinsic interest in this area. And they might have heard me talk at a parent evening, or in some media or something like that, and they've had a stack of self-help books on these topics, which, as you know, Lindsay, some of those self-help books do have a scientific base to them. They don't always make that explicit. So they're people that are really thirsty for this sort of information, that don't realise that there is actually science underpinning it. And I guess, that third, sort of leading into that third category, are people that are really interested in peak performance. Because as I said, these skills I used extensively in my role as a clinical psych, but I also use them extensively in my role as an executive coach for peak performance. So my argument, and I guess what became really clear to me, was that unless you were, and I say tongue-in-cheek, fortunate enough to have suffered depression or anxiety and been to see particularly a clin psych or a psych, or if you'd been lucky enough to work with an executive coach or a good sports coach, possibly, but the majority of people in our communities have never learnt these skills proactively, which is why, I am, and I know you are, passionate about getting this into schools as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the very act of framing them as skills, as things that can be learned, that opens up a whole new set of opportunities. I always found it interesting that some of the psychological or psychosocial approaches in the clinical, psychological, medical paradigms were seen effectively as self-help because it was not the practitioner that was doing the majority of the work. I just want to ask you, how will people benefit? You talk about who they benefit, but how do they actually, not in terms of the content, but they pick up the book. What actually happens between them and the book, and then how does that translate into behaviour?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I guess
magic happens.
I hope to think so. I mean, my hope is, and having again run lots and lots of workshops over the last 15, 20 years, is that it does sort of pique some interest for people that have read a little bit in this area, and then they just want to read a bit more, or they leave it out for, you know, their partner or their kids to read, and they might pick it up and have a look at it. But I mean, it'd be great to be able to run it, you know, to read it in a book club format or something like that, to sort of share what is working, perhaps what's not working. I'm not suggesting that every single tool, and I know that from having worked as a practitioner for years, that not every single tool works for every single person. But yeah, I'd hope to think that people do become much more equipped. So, and we've been doing that with the business for many years, is trying to teach these skills proactively. And like when COVID's hit, we've been having so many requests for resilience training right now, which is what we're doing. But really the ideal is that kids learn this at school. It may not prevent every episode of mental illness, but it might prevent quite a lot. And it might also help people to be the best that they can be. And for me, these are key skills. They're not the be all and end all for self-actualization, if you like, but I think that they're foundational components to being self-actualized on the journey to self-actualization, if you like.
Yeah, and I agree with that totally, because to me, prevention means to stop. And so not everything we do is to stop illness. We do a lot of other things. We build capabilities. And as we talked about the stuff I'm doing with UNESCO and the relationship between flourishing and education, just the act of learning skills is intimately linked with flourishing. It's not necessary to flourish, but it's the actual learning itself is intimately linked with flourishing and growth. So, and that's where it really fits nicely with the skills-based approach. Now, you asked me before, we joked about me asking you really personal questions, so this is my chance. The most intellectual question you can have, and that's deeply personal in my view. I'm a big believer in understanding authors to understand what is written, which is whenever I teach, I try to outline my background so that people can put it in perspective.
Yeah.
So the question I have for you is, what does this book tell us about Suzy Green? And most importantly, what does it tell us about Suzy Green's view of humans and how Suzy views humans?
Yeah, and I think I said to you, Lindsay, like I'd made a few points. I thought that was the best question that you had put in for me to consider. But now as you're actually speaking, I've had another thought, and that is quite personal. Some people on the call will know that I left school when I was 16, and I was the first person in my family to go to university. And when I went back as a mature age student at 24, I think I started my undergrad, and psychology changed my life. Like it absolutely changed my life. And I was fortunate to have a partner in my early 20s that was studying psychiatry that introduced me to CBT very early on. And again, it absolutely changed my life. So now I'm, obviously aware of some of the newer approaches, ACT-based approaches, which I embrace and utilize, but learning those basic mindset skills in my 20s and realizing that thoughts weren't necessarily facts and that I could be curious about my mindset completely changed my life. And it's not to say that I don't still have a lot of the ants, the automatic negative thoughts. And I do often do a bit of self-disclosure when I'm teaching this, because I guess with my background, a lot of my ants have been around competence, and perhaps, publishing 20 peer-reviewed articles has been about proving to myself that I'm smarter than what I think I am. But now I'm a lot more, I guess, kinder, and I use a lot more humor when I have the ants, and I sort of go, oh, here you go again. Like, really? Is this stuff still happening? But, the skills in the book that I've identified every single one, Lindsay, I've applied to my own life, and they have helped me enormously. And again, they've helped numerous clients that I've worked with, lots and lots of clients over the years. But in terms of my belief around human nature, I remember one of my close colleagues who you know as well, Travis Kemp, Dr. Travis Kemp, and he said to me once that he had an intern psychologist that had shared with him that if they were really being honest, that they didn't really believe that people could change. And Travis had said to me, how on earth is that person going to be a psychologist? You know, because that belief will underpin every aspect of who they are and how they work with people. You know, it will come out even unconsciously. And I've always had, I guess, an innate belief in people's capacity for growth. I have hope. It's one of my top strengths. And, you know, even in my clinical work, I guess I had this belief, and look, it's been to my detriment. I have rose-coloured optimism I've had in the past. It's got me into a lot of trouble, Lindsay, to tell you the truth. But I do have this capacity, I guess, to look at people, see the good in them, and see their capacity for growth. So I think, again, the book for me is the key skills that could potentially help people in that way a little bit.
So people can change, people can grow, people can learn skills. So they seem to be fundamental assumptions about your views of humans, which might seem obvious to people who know you.
Yes.
But when you actually look, not everyone has those beliefs about humans, and not everybody has, nor does every human change theory or every personality theory or medical theory have those assumptions either. So I think it's really, really important to outline that.
Yeah. And Lindsay, I do have another quick story. Like when I was working in the psychiatric...
How brief is it, Suzy?
It's a very brief one. But, you know, you have some of those memories and they stick with you, particularly those early on when you're very, you know, naive as a psychologist. And I had been working with someone that was quite psychiatrically unwell, and I was having supervision with the psychiatrist as well. And I'd been working with her, I don't know, maybe for a year. And I remember going to him and saying, I've done everything. Like I don't know what else to do. And he said to me, Suzy, sometimes people need a therapeutic break, he said. So they need to go out into the world and they need to have experiences. And you know what? Years later, after I'd moved to Sydney, I went back to the psychiatric clinic down in the Illawarra, and by a bizarre set of circumstances, this client was there and I didn't even recognise her. Like this was probably 5 or 6 years later, and her life had changed, and I could never, ever have predicted that was going to happen. And I guess one of the big learnings for me was, as a practitioner, was not being overly attached to the outcome for clients, because I guess you can just do the best you can do. And I guess for me, that's been pulling all of this together for the book. But, you know, then letting go of that, letting it go out into the ether and hoping that it does have a positive impact on people.
Absolutely. We were talking earlier about, you know, our own backgrounds. We both had training in clinical psychology, which, as we know, has in positive psychology language focuses on the negative end of the spectrum in a very fruitful way, with things like anxiety and depression and addiction, etc. But the other thing we share is both positive psychology, of course, and coaching psychology. So in terms of positive psychology and coaching psychology, how do those two ideas come out through this book? Because not everybody combines those two explicitly or has the skill to do that. So how have they shaped the book?
Well, I guess I wrote it as, and I have described it, I think, in the introduction as being in a self-coaching format. But I think what the book I've attempted to do is to bring the knowledge, the education, but use a coaching approach as best as I could, you know, in terms of it being self-coaching rather than a professional coach, although I do recommend perhaps trialing a professional coach at the end. But I think what we found also in our work, particularly in coaching, and we have a number of larger coaching programs, is what we're finding is even the highly capable leaders that we're working with, they actually don't have these skills. They might have, they might have some basic mindset, or they might be doing a bit of mindfulness, but They don't understand the concepts around job crafting, for, you know, in terms of meaning. They don't understand intrinsic motivation. So the coaches that work with us are actually trying to teach and coach. And when ideally coaching is that the person already has some form of education and you're drawing it an internal knowledge and you're drawing it out and you're helping them to apply it to their lives. So it is still a bit of a challenge, like in, you know, I think that ideally we need some education, but we need a coaching approach to apply it to our lives. And there are various ways we can use coaching, as you know, whether it is professional, peer, co-coaching or self-coaching, but we do need coaching to make the content personally meaningful. Because you can have a lecture on strengths, for example. We know transfer or retention of training is less than 10%, a number of studies have shown. So unless you have some sort of methodology to make that learning personally meaningful and then apply it to your life, it's a waste of time and money. So I'm a big fan, as you know. I've written and presented on the integration of positive psych and coaching psych. I think they need to be more and more integrated as we progress.
So for those busy listeners that haven't had the chance to read what you've written about that, what are your core views on that, on the relationship between pos psych and coaching?
Yeah, well, I think coaching, there's still a lot of misperceptions about what it is, and it has historically come from an achievement perspective, you know, set a goal, achieve a goal. For me, coaching is first and foremost about building relationships with people. And in fact, I would argue you can't coach if you haven't got those basic micro skills that we learned in clinical and counselling psych. And, you know, there's been my study and our colleague Gordon Spencer's study, the coaching studies have been included, I think now in 3 meta-analyses on positive psychology interventions. So they have been identified in and of themselves as positive psychology interventions. But what I've been writing about, and also with my colleague Dr Sean O'Connor, is how can we use coaching as an amplifier of every other positive psychology intervention. And I think I saw Matthew White on the call too, and we did publish a chapter in Future Directions in Wellbeing, in Matt's book as well, around that concept that, you know, there's the learning, but then it is how do we use coaching to actually take that learning, perhaps, you know, through explicit goal setting, you know, in terms of how am I going to use, I've just had a lecture on strengths, what resonated with me, how do I want to apply that to my life professionally or personally, and then how am I going to track the goal striving process? Because coaching for me too, one part is the goal setting, but it's probably even more powerful coaching is the goal striving process, is that accountability and staying on track over a period of time. Yeah,
that's the tough bit, the over time part. Now, I don't want you're getting all professorial on me, and you use the term meta-analysis. So just for people who, just quickly, what is a meta-analysis? Just because you slipped that in there.
Very simply, just bringing together a large number of studies and looking at the power of those studies. So yeah, there's been a stack of different types of positive psych interventions like kindness and gratitude and forgiveness types of interventions. And so if you think about coaching, I guess the type of coaching studies that I've done and we did, Lindsay, it's helping people to set a personally meaningful goal. And that could be any goal. And this is where it's, I guess, different from, say, a positive psychology intervention where you might do a series of different types of positive psychology activities. The goal of that, and we actually did a study at North Sydney Girls and Boys with Jackie Norrish, Bella Broderick, and we compared Jackie's positive psych 10-week program where the students were learning all about positive psych, and we compared it to my coaching intervention. So the goal of the pos psych intervention was to increase wellbeing. So that was their goal through a series of pos psych interventions. The goal of the coaching was whatever the goal they wanted it to be. So they chose the goal, and it was, you know, it's through the process of coaching that the wellbeing effects occur. Although in that study, I have to say, we didn't get wellbeing. We got academic goal striving increases, which the school and the parents were all really happy about, but we actually didn't get the wellbeing effects. So the principals both then said at the end that we need both, which is what I was saying before. We need the education around the positive psych interventions, but we need the coaching to then implement it and to look at both academics and personal goals as well.
So what I'm hearing is you're really combining not only positive psych and coaching, but your expertise as a practitioner and also your critical thinking from the scientific background, and also your expertise as an educator, to combine all these into how you've packaged this book. Would that be a fair summary?
I guess so, yeah. And yeah, I mean, when you've been writing academically for a long time, it takes a bit to get out of writing in that way. And look, I have also written for the media for a number of years, but it is a bit of a change getting into that, writing for, as I said, somebody that you've got in mind, and how can you best bring that to life and make it meaningful for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a question, and I experience this a lot myself in my work and the areas that we share. So obviously some folks are very skeptical or cynical or just plain right negative or oppositional about positive psychology and coaching. Many of our listeners may not be, but I'm sure they know people who are.
Yeah.
How do you deal with this? How do you deal with skepticism, cynicism, or prejudice maybe about pos psych and coaching?
Yeah, and as probably like you, Lindsay, I think I've heard it all over the last 20 years. And it was actually a lot harder in the early days, because now people are more receptive, and particularly in pos ed. But we had to work really, really hard in the early days, I guess, to build a business case, a scientific case, a rationale for it. And I think that's where, for me, that's paid off, because I did know the science and I was able to quote it, and I was able to present it in a way that was relevant to the audience that was in front of me. And some people are just happy enough to hear, maybe 1 or 2 studies. Others, if you're working with lawyers, or we work with vets, all sorts of people, they really want to know the stronger science behind it. But I guess I've also been compassionate, because and I know it's a bit cliche, but everybody is on their own journey and in terms of where they're at. And another, one of these stories that stuck with me is a school principal deputy that said to me that when they first launched, there were quite a few cynics. So they launched very quickly in the early days. And she said after 4 years, one of the staff members who'd been really quite negative and cynical had come to her 4 years later and said, I think I know what you're talking about, And so everybody is on a different timeline and journey, and, you just don't know when perhaps something might resonate with people. And I've also found that, like, someone in an audience might relate to me and connect with me and hear what I'm saying, but others won't. And then they'll go to your lecture or Matt's lecture or someone else's, and they'll relate to Matt, and he's basically saying the same thing, but it's just who you are and how you're presenting it. So I think that's why we do need many voices out there, particularly with the science background to support it.
So I'm hoping, Suzy, that your book could bring people around in quicker than 4 years.
I hope so. And I think, as I said, right now, what I am finding is that because people are really needing this stuff right now, and I know I've been doing webinars with a group of lawyers, and I was told that they've never had this content ever in their professional development. And they've actually, maybe whether it's the format of the webinar where people can be quite anonymous, but they've been so interactive, so engaged with it, and they're just lapping it up. And also too, because I do talk about the work we do in education, and people are really interested to hear about that, with children, and this content is more relevant now than ever, I think. So I think it is a good time to be taking it out there a bit more broadly. Absolutely.
Okay, one of the honours that I have in my role as an academic is to follow ideas, fall in love with new ideas and chase them. And if I don't have time to do them, then maybe a student will pick them up and do a PhD on it. And I get to see that, and that's kind of a luxury of the role. And so where I'm going with this is that I'm imagining that with your inquiring mind, you've also got some current interests and that maybe even gone beyond the book already. So I just want to finish with this question about, what are you really interested in right now intellectually? I mean, the book's done, and you obviously keep being interested in it, many aspects of it. But is there a particular idea or a particular endeavour that you're really interested in right now? And if so, are you going to write about it as well? So just go with the interest question first, and then we'll come to the writing bit next.
Yeah, and I think it maybe is reflective of this age and stage of life that I'm at right now. But maybe 18 months or so ago, I co-authored another chapter, academic chapter, on meaning-based coaching with Professor Ole Spaten out of University of Aalborg in Denmark. And I actually had to give a lot of thought to that and do a lot more work than I normally would in writing a chapter where I'm basically pulling bits and pieces that I've already been working on. So I had to give a lot of thought to, what does meaning-based coaching refer to? Where would it be used? How would it be used? So I was looking at a lot of the literature on meaning, I guess, existential psychology. And then, I've been really interested in the recent work of Scott Barry Kaufman on self-actualization. And I was just saying to you, like at uni, I think we would have had less than one lecture on humanistic psychology. And as most of us, the people on the call that do know about positive psych will know that it does stand on the shoulders of humanistic psychology. So I've really been very excited to see Scott drawing heavily, particularly on Maslow. And I've just personally finished Way of Being by Carl Rogers myself, which has just been an absolute joy for me to read that book. And his ideas were so far ahead of their time in helping people, I guess, be fully functioning individuals. And so I'm more and more interested in, I guess, transformation, adult development theory, which I'm still very much a beginner on, some of Kegan's work. And then I guess, as I was saying, how do these key skills sort of fit into that picture of our development as human beings towards self-actualization and this whole concept of meaning? And then the latest book I'm reading is The 100-Year Life, which was written by a psychologist and economist through the London School of Economics, I think. And I'm just loving that as well, because my parents are 93, which is amazing. So I'm hoping to have at least a 100-year life. And I'm very interested how, I guess, coaching and positive psychology can help us, to do that as well, to flourish through a 100-year life.
No, that's brilliant. Yeah, I have a goal to get to 90, and I always say, if you want to prove me wrong and celebrate it, good luck to you. So is there a writing goal? Because this is done. Have you had time? I know we're celebrating and we should, but do you have another, is there a writing goal at the moment, or is it still incubating?
It's still incubating a little bit. I mean, right now we are doing a lot on, this book, I do say, is for mental health, well-being and capability. But right now, everyone's really interested, obviously, in resilience. And we've been using the mental toughness construct for a number of years now. And whilst there is some crossover in the content here, there are some specific skills that I learn as a clinical psych that are also used in sports psych as well, that I possibly didn't cover in this book. So that's a possibility. But yeah, I think I'll take a little bit of a breather this year, I think, Lindsay.
Fantastic. So I just want to finish firstly by congratulations.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to see. And also I'm going to slip in a little brief extra question, a simple one, and that is what's your, apart from people buying the book, that's obviously a wish, but what's your wish for your readers? What do you wish for them in engaging with the book?
I think it is to become more hopeful. And I think, again, I'm blessed with, perhaps it is more of a genetic inheritability of this high levels of optimism and hope. And look, I've, now at my age, I've lived long enough to have been through a few challenges in my life, and to see that, that I have come out stronger and wiser, thankfully, and that there is hope, and that there's always options and plans. And I think also for me, it has been having people in my life that have believed in me, and you are definitely one of those people that I can say has helped me in that regard, particularly as someone that you know, didn't have a lot of belief in herself. So yeah, I just hope people that become a little bit more hopeful for their capacity to change and live a good life.
Sounds like a wonderful wish. Now, we are going to hand back now to Claudia. And once again, Suzy, congratulations. And Claudia will take us through a few of the questions coming through the chat room there.
Thank you so much, Lindsay.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. You were an excellent interviewer, and thanks, Suzy, for sharing your story. So we'd like to open to the floor now. If any of you have any questions. Suzy, we do have one from Tia, a great question. What is the best way to read the book, beginning to end, or pick a chapter that's relevant as you go? And you mentioned trying a coach. Would the book work alongside working with a coach as you're reading?
Yes, and hello, Tia from London. Thanks for joining us. I think ideally it would be going from beginning to end, but I know if you're anything like me, I've got about 5 books on the go at the moment, and I pick them up depending on how I feel. And so there wouldn't be necessarily anything wrong with opening a chapter, one that maybe speaks to you, you know, so or just opening and saying, oh, maybe this is, you know, the one for me tonight or whatever. And but yeah, I guess ideally it would be going from beginning to end. And then absolutely would be if you've never experienced having a coach and you have an opportunity to, I know it is a privilege, it's not always available to everyone, or at least find a buddy and do a co-coaching scenario as well. I would absolutely recommend. But in terms of the coaching, I've had 3 coaches in my life, professional coaches at key transition points, and it's always been, you know, it's been very, very helpful for me to have that experience. And particularly, I know there are people on here that are probably interested in being coaches. And if you're going to be a coach, it's always good to have the experience yourself as well.
Excellent. Helen would like you to share the books that you're reading.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, I only just finished Way of Being last week. I'm reading The 100-Year Life. I think I'm reading, what's the Danish one, Heiger, you know, with the Danish, I can't remember the title of it, because I went to Denmark last year and I started reading that. I guess I am interested in the little things, the simple joys and pleasures that can bring a lot of comfort to people's lives. And I think I've got one by a futurist, Gihan Pereira. He actually is a Western Australian guy, and he presented at our conference at Perth College last year. I love also anything to do with the future. Absolutely. I had the opportunity, actually Lindsay was there too, to attend the World Government Summit in Dubai last year. And it was one of those pinch me moments, like just being there, seeing what's happening, you know, in so many different areas, technology, not just psychology, but so yeah, anything to do with the future I'm really interested in as well.
Excellent. A question from Katie. What is the one piece of advice you would have for those of us that would love to follow in your footsteps with research, education, or leading teams?
Oh, wow, that's a big one. I think absolutely follow your passion. You know, research I don't think is for everybody, but I'm really, I guess, a big fan of trying to bring together academics and practitioners, because we benefit from each, and I would love to see more collaborations between practitioners and academics. So try and reach out to an academic. I mean, when I did my doctorate, I reached out to some of the leaders in the field, and 99.9 actually did respond and, you know, get back to you. So you'd hope so in the field of positive psychology, but reach out to people. And look, I usually say to, you know, stalk me, you know, not too seriously, but if I don't get back to you, please email me, because I do mean to. So, and I will get back to you in time, or, you know, go through the info email and the team will harass me as well.
Knowing your love for serendipity and synchronicity, I wonder where you're seeing the relevance of the literature on consciousness and where you would suggest those interested might start their reading.
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, that's still a fairly new area to me. I mean, even I've briefly read some of Ken Wilber's work. I mean, I'm not an expert on that by any means. I mean, I think that's part of my next developmental phase, to tell you the truth. There is some great work being done. Lindsay, maybe you could comment on this around the development, the adult development, because again, when I was at uni, we do developmental psychology. It's nearly all on child and adolescence. We didn't really look at adult development. And I know that's a relatively new area too, Lindsay, I guess, relatively speaking, would you say?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is a relatively new area. I mean, there are obviously Keegan's work, etc. And I was also trained back in George Kelly's work, and he had an assumption that the development didn't end in the traditional ways that, you know, adult didn't end at adolescence and started adulthood. The idea of stages he totally rejected. So it's as much as new adult theories as it is as the rejection of the developmental stages approaches, and we're seeing that in the popular media as well, with the, you know, 50 is the new 60 or whatever, which I can't remember which way it goes, but you know what I mean. This sort of challenging of age categories and psychographics, but it with the assumptions that you were talking about, that is the idea that we can change. You have a population that actually believes that there is this challenging of and the society becoming more cosmopolitan. We're breaking down the classical categories and classical assumptions about development and what's possible. And we've just seen that in the last, you know, if you want to see the challenging of assumptions, have a look at society in the last 2 months. It's a lot of our things we didn't think were possible have happened.
Absolutely.
And so what I'm saying is, don't hold those theories or models too tightly, because there's a lot of things that are changing very rapidly. And I haven't directly answered the question, but I had a go. So
absolutely. But I think, Lindsay, it's made me think about too, like particularly in pos-psych, you hear many people defining it as a science of well-being. I always use the Gable and Height of the science of the conditions and processes of optimal human functioning, which for me, like I absolutely, as a clinical psych, interested in reduction of mental health and enhancement of well-being, but I'm more and more interested in positive psychology and coaching psychology being about personal growth and self-actualization, if you want to use that term, or whatever that is, the stages of adult development. So I'm more interested in how we use positive psychology for growth rather than and I don't want to say just well-being's sake, but do you know what I mean? That it's more, because part of growth is also experiencing suffering, I guess, as well. So, yeah.
We have another question from the lovely Clive.
Hello, Clive.
A positive relationship with yourself and others has been key to your capacity to flourish. Do you see this reflected in each of the 6 M's?
A positive relationship with yourself and others, and is it reflected in the 6 M's? I think so. Well, absolutely. In the mood component, talk about the research on, I guess, the power of positive relationships for our mood. I mean, the mindfulness allows us to be more mindfully present with others. And look, in the early days, I sat on a panel with a couple of very well-known psychiatrists, actually, and one of them, who in my mind wasn't fully educated on what positive psychology was, had critiqued it and said, isn't it just the individualistic pursuit of happiness? And I'd said, well, no, not for me. Like, it's never been about that. It really is about being, functioning as well as you can, so you can help more people around you, the people around you. So I think for me too, we often use the analogy of how geese fly in the V formation, and they use that video in a lot of those leadership programs, how when one goose drops back, that another goose, like if one goose is sick, another goose will drop back and help it come back or take it away. And for me, I found myself that particularly when you're going through adversity and you're in the eye of the storm, I know the last one of those I had, did I use all of these skills? Absolutely not. And I was quite a sophisticated, user of these skills. But when you're in the eye of the storm, it's often really hard to apply them or even to think to apply them, which is why for me, we need all the geese, if you like, around us, or as many people as we can that are skilled, so that we can help people when they are in the eye of the storm. So that's how I sort of try to look at it.
Excellent answer. The last question from Naomi: for someone who wants to become a coach, what would you recommend as any further study on the top of experience?
Yes, so I guess I get asked this question a lot. We have actually, for those on the call that are interested, we do have a handout for recommended further education in positive psychology and coaching psychology, because we get it all the time. And we have recommended courses, just certificate, basic introductory courses, right through to PhDs, which Lindsay offers, and the MAP at Melbourne Uni. But in terms of being, and again, I use the word professional coach. The industry is not that regulated, to be honest. But if you want to have a career where you are working with people, you're working quite deeply at what we would call developmental coaching or transformational coaching, then you do need to invest a lot more in coaching and coaching psychology. So positive psychology you can use in any aspect of life, in whatever role you're in. But I would argue if you want to work particularly as a professional coach that works with people's psyches and their lives, then you need to have a basic psychological underpinning. You don't have to be, I wouldn't say you have to be a registered psych, but you definitely would want to invest in understanding basic psychological theories of change and the psychology of human behaviour.
Excellent. We've got one more, from Pep. In your experience of training in secondary schools, which area of positive psychology have teenage students been most interested in learning about?
In secondary, well, I guess I haven't personally worked directly with the students. I only hear from the staff, and absolutely mindfulness. And I still recall one of the students in my class that went to trial it with his year 9 boys, and he thought they just sort of, roll their eyes. And he said he did it one day and he said they were quite receptive. And then the next day he came in and he just went on with the class, and they all said, sir, aren't you going to continue? And so I am hearing from a lot of educators that they're sort of begging for it. Kids are craving to have some time off from all the thinking and the distraction. And so, but I would love to see these basic thinking skills, basic cognitive behavioural and some great ACT techniques for teenagers. I'd love to see that in all schools as well.
Excellent, thank you. That was all the questions.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Claudia, for helping us host the session. Thank you to everybody. Thank you. There's so many people. Matt's been on the call, a lot of new people as well. And Lindsay, absolutely big thank you to you for all your support in my career over the years. And yes, I'm looking forward to what's next on your journey as well.
Yeah, we need a Zoom call at 11 with India. That's but once again, Suzy, congratulations, and it is really nice to see people bring their whole career together and then use it for the benefit of others. Thank you to all the listeners, and thank you very much, Claudia, as well. Congratulations and good night to everyone.
Thank you, Lindsay. We forgot to mention we have got a discount code for anyone that does want to buy the book through our shop directly, but it's also on the online booksellers as well. But please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything I've mentioned. If you want a paper on something, we'll do our absolute best to get back to you and help in any way that we can. So thank you and good evening to everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.